Welcome dear students. This is the fifth video on practice problem for accounts of not-for-profit concerns. Today we will be solving sum number 11 on page number 121 of your government textbook. So let's read sum number 11. Before we begin reading, I want you to look at this question. It is a second type of question wherein an opening balance sheet is given, then receipts and payment account is given, and adjustment is given. Now let's understand the pattern of how we can solve the sum. We will first begin with receipts and payments and do the identification. Then we will read the balance sheet and do the markings in the receipts and payment. In case if the names of the assets or liabilities do not appear in the payments and receipts side, then we will indicate it with a sign. Finally, we will read the adjustments and do the markings in the receipts and payments. So now let's read question number 11. From the following balance sheet and receipts and payment account of New English School, Barshi, prepare income and expenditure account for the year ending 31st March 2020 and balance sheet as on that date. Now before we start reading balance sheet, we will first read our receipts and payment. So let's come to receipts and payment. On the receipt side, we will first do our identification. You know the symbols for identification. On the receipt side, we have I for income, L for liability, and there could be sale of assets. On the payment side, we have E for expense and A for assets. Let's begin step number 1, identification. So on the receipt side, we have two balance brought down, that is cash in hand and cash at bank. This is my opening balances. Opening balances we do not consider. Next is tuition fees. It is an income. Term fees, income. Admission fees, income. Donation, what they have said is capital, which means we have to put it in our liability. Interest received, income. Government grant is given for revenue, which means it's a general, so it will be income. Sundry receipts, income. We will now do the identification on the payment side. Salary, expense. Library books, asset. Office rent, expense. Printing and stationery, expense. Sundry expense, expense. Insurance, expense. Sports expenses, expense. Annual gathering expense, expense. Furniture, asset. Repairs, expense. Balance carried down, cash in hand and cash at bank is my closing balance. So closing balance of cash in hand will be asset and cash at bank will also be asset. So with this, students, we have completed step number 1, identification. Step number 2 will be reading the balance sheet and marking star in our receipts and payment. But students, before we go ahead, you have to remember certain points in your mind with regard to balance sheet. Balance sheet as on 1st April 2019. This is my opening balance sheet. As you know, opening has only one effect. So this is first and most important point that you need to keep it in your mind. Opening balance sheet will have only one effect. Assets and liabilities has to be added into your current year. If any kind of outstanding expenses or income is given in your balance sheet, you will subtract it. And if any prepaid expense or income is given in your opening balance sheet, you will add it. These are the pointers that you need to keep it in your mind. So let's begin reading our balance sheet and marking star in our receipts and payment. On the liability side, we have capital fund. It's my opening capital. This will be written directly on the liability side. Asset side, I have cash in hand and cash at bank. This is my opening balances of cash in hand and cash at bank. Students, as mentioned to you, opening balances of cash in hand and cash at bank we do not consider. Next is building. Let's have a look on the payment side. See, on the payment side, we do not have building. So I don't have to mark a star, which means over here, I will indicate it with a plus sign, which means I'll have to add it in my balance sheet. Furniture. Let's come on to the payment side. Yes, I have furniture, so I'll mark a star. Next is library books. So we will have a look at the payment side. So on the payment side, I have library books, so I will mark a star. Next is computer laboratory. Again, on the payment side, I'll have a look. I don't have computer laboratory, which means I'll put a plus sign. With this, students, we have completed reading our balance sheet and marking star in our receipts and payment. Let's continue with our step number 2, reading our additional information and marking star in our receipts and payment. We'll begin with the first adjustment. Outstanding salary of rupees 9,000. So I will have to mark star for salary. So on the payment side, I will mark star for salary. Next is adjustment number 2. Outstanding tuition fees rupees 15,000. So I will mark star for tuition fees. So on the receipt side, I have tuition fees. I'll mark a star. Adjustment number 3. Depreciate library books by rupees 9,000. And furniture by rupees 10,000. So I have to mark star for library books and for furniture. So I will mark star for library books and I will mark star for furniture. With this, students, we have completed step number 2, reading of balance sheet and adjustment and marking star in our receipts and payment. We are now ready to begin with step number 3, writing in the inner column and the outer column. Students, please make a note. The ones which are marked star will be written in the inner column and the ones which are not marked star will be written in the outer column. So let's begin from the receipt side. We have 2 balance brought down, cash in hand and cash at bank. We do not consider. Next is tuition fees. There is a star. So on the income side, I'll write by tuition fees. I will mark a star and write it in the inner column 90,000. Next is term fees. Again on the income side, I'll write by term fees. There is no star, so I'll write it in the outer column 3,000. Next is admission fees. Again on the income side, I'll write by admission fees. No star, outer column 12,000. Next is donation. In the bracket they have given us capital, which means I'll have to write it on my liability side. But before I write donation, I will give the heading as capital. Then I will add donation to my capital. Amount is 61,000 in the inner column. Next is interest received. On the income side, I'll write by interest received. There is no star. I'll write it in the outer column 2000. Next is government grant, which is given for revenue. So again on the income side, I'll write by government grant. There is no star. I'll write it in the outer column 1,20,000. Next is sundry receipts. Again on the income side, I'll write by sundry receipts. There is no star, so I'll write it in the outer column 11,000. With this, students, we have completed receipt side. We will now begin from the payment side. So we have salary. On the expense side, I'll write there is a star, so I'll write it in the inner column. So on the expenditure side, I will write to salary 90,000 and I'll mark a star. Next is library books. So on the asset side, I'll write library books. There are 2 stars, so I will also mark 2 stars and write it in the inner column 14,000. Next is office rent. On the expenditure side, I'll write to office rent. There is no star, so I'll write it in the outer column 10,000. Next is printing and stationery. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to printing and stationery. There is no star, outer column 22,000. Next is sundry expense. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to sundry expenses. There is no star, outer column 12,000. Next is insurance. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to insurance. There is no star, outer column 10,200. Next is sports expense. Again on the expenditure side, to sports expenses. Outer column 8,000. Next is annual gathering expenses. Again on the expenditure side, I'll write to annual gathering expense. In the outer column 9,000. Next is furniture. So on the asset side, I'll write furniture. There are 2 stars, so I'll mark 2 stars and I'll write it in the inner column 50,000. Next is repairs. On the expenditure side, I'll write 2 repairs. There is no star, I'll write it in the outer column 15,000. Next is balance carried down. Cash in hand and cash at bank, both will be written on the asset side. So I just have to copy it. Cash in hand, inner column 4,800. Cash at bank 70,000. So the total of this goes in the outer column 74,800. With this, students, we have completed step number 3, writing it in the inner column and the outer column. We will now begin with step number 4. But in step number 4, we will first begin with balance sheet. Remember, students, balance sheet has only one effect, so we have to write it only once. So let's begin. Capital fund, which will be written on the liability side. So on the liability side, I have already written capital. I'll just write the amount 6,43,000 in the inner column. On the asset side, we have opening balances. So the opening balances we do not consider of cash in hand and cash at bank, so we will not write it. Building, we will write it on the asset side, so we have to add it. So on the asset side, I will write building. There is no star, nothing. So directly in the outer column, 4,50,000. Next is furniture. So on the asset side, I already have furniture. So I will write add opening furniture, 72,000. Let's add it up. 50,000 plus 72,000 will give me 1,22,000, still in the inner column because I have another star. Next is library books. So on the asset side, I already have library books. I'll just write add opening books, 45,000. So we will add it. 14,000 plus 45,000 will give me 59,000, still in the inner column because there is one more star. Next is computer laboratory. So computer laboratory, I will write it on my asset side. So on the asset side, since I do not have computer laboratory, I will write it computer laboratory. In the outer column, 60,000. With this, students, we have completed with our balance sheet. Let's continue with our step number 4, that is adjustment. But students, remember, adjustments always have two effects. So let's begin with the first adjustment. Outstanding salary of rupees 9,000. So I will have to add it to the salary. So on the expenditure side, I will write add outstanding 9,000 rupees. So 90,000 plus 9,000 will give me 99,000 in the outer column. This is my first effect for outstanding salary. My second effect will be on the liability side. So I will leave some few lines and then I will write outstanding salary. In the outer column, 9,000. Adjustment number 2, outstanding tuition fees rupees 15,000. So I will have to add it to my tuition fees. So on the income side, I'll say add outstanding 15,000. So 90,000 plus 15,000 will give me 1,05,000. This is my first effect for outstanding tuition fees. My second effect for outstanding tuition fees will be on the asset side because it is an income. So I'll write outstanding tuition fees. In the outer column, 15,000. Adjustment number 3, depreciate library books by rupees 9,000 and furniture by 10,000. We will first do depreciation for library books. So my first effect will be on the asset side. I'll say less dep 9,000 rupees. So 59,000 minus 9,000 will give me 50,000 in the outer column. This is my first effect for depreciation on library books. My second effect for depreciation will be on the expenditure side. So on the expenditure side, I'll write down to dep on library books. In the outer column, I'll write the amount 9,000. Next is depreciation on furniture by rupees 10,000. So let's do depreciation on furniture. So for furniture, I'll say less dep rupees 10,000. So 1,22,000 minus 10,000 will give me 1,12,000 in the outer column. This is my first effect for depreciation on furniture. My second effect for depreciation on furniture will be on the expenditure side. So on the expenditure side, I'll write down to dep on furniture. In the outer column, 10,000. With this, students, we have completed step number 4, doing our balance sheet and our adjustments. Now do our last step, that is step number 5, closing the books of account. We will first calculate our expenditure. When we calculate the expenditure amount, I get a total of 2,04,200. Now in the same manner, I will total the income side. So when I total income side, I get a total of 2,53,000. Now in the same manner, we will follow the ledger format. Double underline on both the side. Bigger total to be written on both the side. So I'll write 2,53,000 on both the side. From the bigger total, I will minus the smaller total. So 2,53,000 minus 2,04,200. I get a balance of 48,800, which I will write on top. Now my income is more than my expense. So when income is more than my expense, which means the concern has made a surplus. So I will write down 2 surplus carried down. In the bracket, I will write excess of income over expenditure. Now since I have got a surplus, in my capital side, I will add surplus 48,800. I can now total the capital amount. So 6,43,000 plus 61,000 plus 48,800. I get a total of 7,52,800, which I'll write it in the outer column. I will now total the liability side. When I total the liability side, I get a total of 7,61,800. Now in the same manner, I will total the asset side. So when I total the asset side, I get the same total as the liability, that is 7,61,800. With this, students, we have tallied the sum, and I hope you have understood the problem.